Do you know what Panerai just lost? It didn't just lose popularity, it lost its soul, and it gets worse. At its peak, collectors weren't just buying Panerai, they were building their identity around it. They tattooed the crown guard, flew across continents to meet strangers, and created one of the first true watch communities long before social media made that normal. But now, the brand is on a decline and it has become a cautionary tale. To understand how Panerai got here and how their situation is, we have to start from where it all began. The spy watch nobody was supposed to own. The story starts in Florence in 1860, when Giovanni Panerai opened a watchmaking school and instrument shop on the Ponte alle Grazie. For the next several decades, Panerai was essentially invisible to the civilian world. It was a supplier of timing instruments, depth gauges, and navigation equipment to the Royal Italian Navy. The work was classified, the watches were classified, the design language that emerged from those commissions. The enormous cushion-shaped case, the lever-locked crown guard, the sandwich dial glowing with radium-based lume, was never meant for a boutique. In the 30s, the Italian Navy commissioned Panerai to produce dive watches for its combat frogmen. The cases were Panerais. The movements were Rolexes. They were sourced from Geneva, fitted into Florence-designed cases, rated to depths that civilian watches of the era could not approach. These were working instruments for men who conducted clandestine underwater operations in wartime, attaching limpet mines to enemy hulls in harbors under blackout conditions. The watch on their wrists was not jewelry, it was equipment. For 60 years, that was all Panerai was. A classified military supplier, a name unknown, outside naval procurement offices, and the workshops where the instruments were built. The watches that survived those decades, the Ref 3646 Radiomir, the Ref 6152 Luminor, are today among the most coveted objects in vintage watchmaking. At the time, they were tools that belonged to the Italian state. When Panerai began selling to the civilian market in 1993, the pre-Richemont era produced fewer than 1,500 civilian watches across 9 references, not 1,500 per year. 1,500 total. Each one was numbered, each one was traceable. The scarcity was not manufactured, it was structural, the residue of a company that had spent 6 decades making things for one customer and was only just learning what it meant to have any others. That scarcity, and the authenticity behind it, was the foundation of everything that followed. You cannot manufacture what Panerai had. 60 years of classified military history does not come from a marketing department, it comes from being real. And for one extraordinary decade, the civilian world discovered it thanks to a single wrist. The accident that started everything. In 1994, Sylvester Stallone was in Florence filming a movie. He wandered into a watch shop near the production location, encountered a Panerai Luminor, and bought it. This is how one of the most valuable brand endorsements in the history of luxury watchmaking began, not with a contract, but with an action star in a watch shop, on a Tuesday, in a city he was working in. The watch was enormous, military, unlike anything he had seen. He bought it and kept wearing it. The watch appeared on his wrist in daylight in 1996. He ordered a batch of custom Slytech models, 105 examples, to give to friends. Arnold Schwarzenegger received one and wore it in a racer the same year. 2 of the most recognizable action stars in Hollywood were now publicly associated with a brand that most of the world had never heard of. The man who facilitated all of this was Monty Shadow, the creative director of Richemont. He is the man described by Richemont's own chairman Johann Rupert as a truffle dog, someone with the rare talent for finding hidden value before anyone else could see it. Shadow had encountered Panerai before Stallone, and he understood immediately what it was: a brand with 60 years of classified military history, a design language unlike anything in the civilian market, and essentially zero public profile. He presented it to Stallone. He introduced Stallone's enthusiasm to Richemont. And in 1997, Monty Shadow served Richemont the entire Officin Panerai brand on a silver platter for less than $1 million. $1 million. For what would become a billion-dollar brand. Richemont's acquisition was announced in the spring of 1997. In April 1998, Panerai debuted at SIHH Geneva, the Salon de la Haute Horlogerie, with 3 models: the Luminor Marina, and the Mare Nostrum chronograph. The watch world, which had spent decades looking at small, complicated dress watches, saw something massive and simple and different. The brand did not need to explain itself. The 60 years of history explained it. Stallone's wrist explained it. The explosion was immediate and unstoppable. What happened next had never happened before in the watch world, and may never happen again. The Paneristi, the internet's first watch cult. Before Instagram taught brands how to build communities, before YouTube made watch reviewing a profession, before any of the infrastructure of modern horological fandom existed, there was Paneristi.com. The forums that formed around Panerai in the late 90s and early 2000s were the first genuine online watch communities in history. Think of everything you know about online communities. Picture Reddit on steroids, or maybe not on steroids, but you get the gist. It was messy in every human sense of the word, kind of like how our comment sections are. But we love it. Love you and we thank you. People from Italy, Japan, America, Australia, and Germany logged on to discuss the precise thickness of the font on a Luminor Marina dial, the exact engraving depth on a caseback, whether a given reference had polished or brushed bevels on the crown guard, the shade of brown on a tropical dial that had aged in a way that no other dial quite replicated. These were not casual conversations. This was obsession operating at a frequency that most hobbies never reach. The writer of the Deadbeat Seconds, one of the watch world's most respected independent voices, described his own initiation precisely. Sitting in a university library, pretending to study, scrolling through photographs of luminors, the huge crown guard, the sandwich dial glowing like molten loom, the engraved lever that looked like military equipment rather than jewelry. He could not afford one. He wanted one so badly that he bought a fake Panerai and wore it around campus, feeling glorious. That experience, wanting something you cannot yet have, researching it obsessively, feeling the specific pleasure of knowing more about it than anyone around you, was the experience the brand generated spontaneously, at scale, without spending a single dollar to manufacture it. Discovering Panerai in 2002 felt like finding a classified document someone had left in a cafe. The military history was not marketing language, it was declassified naval procurement records. The watches were real instruments that had done real work in real operations. The design had not been created by a branding agency. It had emerged from 60 years of solving the specific engineering problems that combat divers faced in the dark. Every detail meant something. And the community that had formed around that meaning was, for a time, the most knowledgeable and passionate watch community in the world. They organized meetups across continents. Strangers flew to Switzerland and Singapore and New York to compare watches and swap straps in hotel lobbies. There were Paneristi events, gatherings with no corporate sponsor, no brand involvement, no agenda beyond the shared devotion to a specific design language and the history behind it. And some of those people, in the way that humans mark the things that have genuinely changed them, got the Crown Guard logo tattooed on their skin. This community did something for Panerai that no advertising budget could have purchased. They made the brand feel like a secret worth being in on. Every new collector who discovered Panerai felt the specific pleasure of arrival, of finding something that not everyone knew, that had a depth of history and variation that rewarded attention and expertise. The Paneristi were walking endorsements, wearing the brand because they loved it, educating strangers because they wanted to share it. At peak mania in the early 2000s, the brand was as culturally hot as Rolex is today. Authorized dealers had no inventory. Waiting lists were real, in the old-fashioned sense. You put your name down and waited because there were not enough watches. The secondary market commanded meaningful premiums. The community was growing. Panerai had been handed something extraordinary, a fan base that had self-organized, self-motivated, and self-funded the most effective brand advocacy program in the watch industry. All Richemont had to do was not break it. They broke it. Not all at once. Slowly, systematically, and in ways that only became visible when it was already too late. The expansion that ate the brand. The rot did not arrive as a single moment. It arrived as a policy. A strategy meeting somewhere in Neuchâtel that decided growth meant more, and more meant better, and the brand's passionate collector base would follow wherever Richemont led. They were wrong about all of it. The catalog began to expand in the mid-2000s. Not gradually, aggressively. Limited editions multiplied. boutique exclusives, regional editions, collaboration pieces, anniversary references, event editions, online exclusives, experience editions tied to adventure trips. Each one was numbered. Each one was theoretically limited. But when you release dozens of limited editions per year across a global distribution network, the word limited loses its meaning entirely. The Paneristi, who had once tracked every reference with the precision of taxonomists, began to lose count. One collector, an OG Paneristi who had been in the community since the beginning, said it plainly. Years later, I used to be able to name every watch. Then I stopped caring when the model numbers went above 300. That sentence is the decline, compressed into one man's disillusionment. The design language that made Panerai legible, the cushion case, the lever crown, the sandwich dial, became the scaffolding on which an infinite number of largely indistinguishable references were hung. Moving the crown to the left side, a destro configuration, technically different, commercially identical, adding a few words to the dial. Releasing the same case in titanium, then Carbotech, then bronze, then ceramic, then composite, each iteration receiving its own PAM number, its own limited edition framing, its own boutique exclusive event. For the collector who had once been able to identify a Panerai from across a room and tell you which specific reference it was and in what year it was made, this was not growth. It was dilution dressed as abundance. Then came the Luminor Dew. This is the moment the brand's identity became a costume. The Dew was Panerai's attempt to reach a new customer, someone who wanted the look of a Panerai without the size or the heft of the original design. Slim case, dressy profile, elegant on the wrist. The problem was fundamental and unfixable. The Luminor's crown guard is an engineering solution to the problem of keeping a large, robust crown watertight under diving pressure. On the Dew, which offered a water resistance of 30 meters, barely enough to survive rain, certainly not a shower, the crown guard was decoration, a costume element. The most recognizable feature of the most recognizable dive watch in the world, stripped of its function, rendered as fashion, a dive watch that cannot survive a shower. Built by the brand whose origin story involves combat frogmen operating in classified wartime harbors. The collectors who had worn Panerai because of what it genuinely was, military, functional, uncompromising, looked at the Dew and understood that the brand had stopped meaning what they thought it meant. The Brooklyn Bridge Special Edition arrived in this same era and confirmed the pattern. A watch sold as a commemorative limited edition, commanding a premium on that basis, with an undecorated, unbranded commodity movement shoved into a closed caseback where no customer would ever see it. The closed caseback was not accidental, it was the tell. The closed caseback mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Because Panerai had found something behind closed casebacks, and they were going to use it again. The man who built it all, and what they did to him. In late 2020, Sylvester Stallone auctioned off the Luminor logo he had worn during the filming of Daylight in 1996. The watch that had started everything, the one that made Richemont realize what they had, that triggered the billion-dollar acquisition, that put a brand no one had heard of onto the wrists of the most photographed action stars in the world. He sold it. To insiders, it was not a celebrity selling a watch. It was a verdict. By then, those who had been paying attention had seen the photographs accumulating for years. Stallone at a Formula One race in Monza wore a vintage Rolex Daytona Paul Newman on his wrist. Stallone at his art exhibition in Hagen wore a Patek Philippe Nautilus 5711. Stallone in London for a television launch, Rolex GMT Master with a tropical dial. The man who had been the unofficial face of Panerai for 2 decades had quietly, publicly, and completely moved on. Before his passing in late 2021, Monty Shadow, the man who had discovered Panerai, introduced it to Stallone and delivered the brand to Richemont for less than $1 million, shared an email with the watch researcher Jose Perestroika. The email was from Stallone. Shadow had been hoping it would be published one day. It was written in December 2017, when Richemont's newly appointed CEO had asked Shadow to reach out to Stallone about rekindling the relationship. This is what Stallone wrote. Truthfully, Panerai has really done very little for me, considering I found the watch. They never would have known about it. I can't even get a discount at Cartier. So, what is in it for me? Seriously, what have you really ever done for me? Did they make me a spokesman, or advertise the watch like Johnny Depp, Cindy Crawford, or Tiger Woods, etc., that I have worked for other companies that are smaller like other celebrities and pay a fee. No, never. I turned them on to a watch that turned into a $1 billion company, which they have done a great job with, and I am basically ignored. There was no closing line, no regards, no sign-off of any kind. The email simply stopped. The man who had delivered a billion-dollar brand to a corporation for essentially nothing, whose wrist had done what no advertising campaign could have done, who had created the cultural context in which the Panerai could form and grow and evangelize, did not even finish the email. He had run out of things to say to a company that had run out of interest in him. Monty Shadow, who had spent years trying to bridge that gap, died of COVID-19 complications in late 2021. Neither Panerai nor Richemont issued a public tribute. The man who had found the brand, packaged it, delivered it, and spent years trying to maintain the relationship that built it, erased without acknowledgement. The casual cruelty of that silence is not just bad public relations. It reveals something about the character of the institution. Consider what Panerai received from these two men. Monty Shadow found the brand, packaged it, delivered it to Richemont for less than $1 million, which Richemont recovered almost immediately by selling a single 60-piece series of platinum Radiomir watches containing old-stock Rolex movements found in a Panerai storeroom. The brand that cost under $1 million was immediately self-funding. Then Stallone put it on his wrist for free, in front of millions of people for years without a contract, without a fee, without even the modest dignity of being called a brand ambassador. The two men who created the billion-dollar brand from almost nothing received, between them, some watches, one small charity contribution in 2005, and silence. If Panerai could treat Stallone, the man whose wrist built the brand, as a resource to be used and discarded, and Monty Shadow, the man who made the acquisition possible, as someone not worth acknowledging after death, then the average collector who loved this brand was never a community to be cherished. They were a market to be managed. And markets, unlike communities, do not mourn the brands that exploit them. They simply leave. And if you needed proof that the collectors were being managed rather than respected, Panerai provided it in June 2020, behind a closed caseback during a pandemic. Pamgate. The deception behind the closed caseback. In June 2020, while the world was navigating the worst public health crisis in a century, Panerai made a quiet decision in its movement production facility. The P9010, the in-house caliber that powered the Luminor Marina and the submersible, watches retailing from $8,000 to over $10,000, was downgraded. The hacking seconds function, which stops the seconds hand when the crown is pulled out to allow precise time setting, was removed. The movement finishing, the polished bevels, the perlage on the main-plate, the satin-brushed bridges, was eliminated, replaced with a basic microblasted surface that the brand would later call, without apparent irony, evolution. Then the casebacks were closed. Previous versions of P9010 powered models had display casebacks, sapphire crystal showing the movement. After June 2020, those same models came with solid steel backs. The watch that had been sold as a showcase of in-house movement craft was now sealed shut. The downgrade was inside. The caseback was the lid. Customers began noticing in late 2020. The seconds hand would not stop when they pulled the crown. They assumed manufacturing defect. They sent the watches to Panerai service centers. The reply that came back was not an apology. It was a sentence. Please be advised that the P9010 movement, used in the PAM 01313, has been updated as of 2020. This movement no longer features the hacking seconds or seconds reset function. The aesthetic of the movement has also been changed from horizontal brushing to a microblasted finishing. The Panerai website, meanwhile, still showed a video demonstrating the hacking seconds function. Still showed the original movement with its polished surfaces and proper finishing. The online description was not updated to reflect what customers were actually receiving. Authorized dealers were never informed. They were still selling the watches using the old movement as the reference point because Panerai had not told them anything had changed. When the watch forums discovered this, and the photographs of the downgraded movement began circulating, the reaction was not merely anger. It was the fury of people who felt they had been caught trusting the wrong institution. The Panerai, who had spent decades arguing about movement finishing in the small hours of the morning, who had paid attention to details that most watch buyers never noticed, were the first to understand exactly what had been done to them. The brand had used their closed caseback as cover, had counted on the fact that most buyers would never look inside, had gambled, correctly, that the people who would notice were a minority, and that the mainstream market would simply buy the watch and never know. This was not a mistake. Mistakes happen in the open. This happened behind a closed caseback, during a pandemic, with no announcement, and with a video still running on the website showing features the watch no longer had. And Pamgate was not even the worst of it. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The manufacturer lie. The P9010 scandal had a companion. Discovered later, documented more thoroughly, and in some ways more damaging to the brand's stated identity. To understand why, you need to understand what the word manufacturer means in watchmaking, and why it commands a premium that nothing else in the industry can quite replicate. A manufacturer is a watchmaker that designs, develops, and produces its own movements, the engines inside the watches, rather than sourcing finished calibers from specialist movement suppliers. It is a distinction that took Panerai years and significant investment to claim. The P9000 series, released from 2005 onward, was the proof of that investment. When Panerai said manufacture movement, it was saying, we designed this, we built this. The movement you are buying at this price exists because we had the engineering capability and the commitment to create it rather than purchase it. The word appeared in boutique presentations, in brand communications, in the implicit justification for why a Panerai with no complications whatsoever, a watch that shows you hours, minutes, and seconds, nothing else, should cost $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. The movement was in-house, the premium was real, collectors accepted it because they believed the claim. The P9200 caliber, introduced as the movement inside Panerai's new chronograph family, was presented as part of this manufacturer lineage. The watches it powered were priced accordingly, some models reaching $28,000. The P9200 is a modified ETA 2892A2 with a Dubois Desprez chronograph module attached. The ETA 2892A2 is a commodity movement available on the open market. Watch parts suppliers list it openly, by name, with a price. It costs a fraction of what Panerai charges for a movement it claims as its own. It is a good movement, competent, reliable, widely used by dozens of watch brands at a range of price points. What it is not is a manufacturer caliber. What it is not is something Panerai developed. What it is not is the thing that $28,000 was supposed to be paying for. The caseback on the chronograph models was, by this point, closed. The movement was not visible. The customer had no way, short of removing the caseback themselves, to verify what they were actually receiving. The closed caseback strategy was now fully legible. It had appeared on the Brooklyn Bridge edition. It had hidden the Pamgate downgrade. And here it was again, sealing away a commodity caliber rebranded as manufacturer on a $28,000 watch, sold to buyers whose trust in the brand's authenticity was the entire basis of the purchase. Together, Pamgate and the P9200 revelation painted a picture that was difficult to dispute. Panerai had systematically used its closed casebacks as a deception strategy. The brand that built its reputation on military authenticity, on the idea that what you saw was exactly what existed, that the watch was precisely what it claimed to be, was charging a manufacturer premium for movements it had not manufactured, finishing it had removed, and features it had quietly deleted. The Paneristi documented all of it. The forums that had once been the brand's greatest asset, The community that had loved this brand loudly, publicly, and permanently became the most thorough archive of its failures. Which is a particular kind of justice. The people who paid attention most closely were the ones who noticed first, and they made sure nobody could claim they had not been told. The market is patient. But the market eventually reads the documentation. The market delivers its verdict. The watch world's taste had been shifting for years before the scandals. The era of oversized watches, which Panerai had pioneered, which the Paneristi had evangelized, which had made a 44mm case feel aspirational rather than excessive, was over. The market moved toward 36mm and 38mm, toward cleaner dials, toward watches that wore closer to the wrist and made fewer demands on the room they entered. Panerai had invented the big watch trend. It had no answer for the end of it. The brand had one structural advantage that should have insulated it from taste cycles. It had a design language so distinctive and so deeply rooted in military history that no other brand could replicate it. The cushion case, the lever crown, the sandwich dial. These were not trends, they were artifacts of 60 years of classified development. If Panerai had protected the authenticity behind them, the brand might have weathered the shift in case size preferences the way a landmark building weathers the buildings constructed around it. Different, older, still standing. Instead, the scandals arrived. The closed casebacks. The P9010 downgrade. The P9200 branded as manufacturer. For collectors who had loved Panerai because they believed it was exactly what it said it was, military, robust, honest, the revelations removed the reason to believe. And a brand whose identity rests entirely on authenticity cannot survive the discovery that its authenticity was managed. The brand that once ranked among the most desirable in the collector community slid to 14th in Swiss watch brand sales rankings by 2017 and continued falling. Authorized dealers quietly exited the brand. No press release, no drama. Just the Panerai display cases carried out one afternoon. The wall space given to something the dealer could actually sell. The secondary market, which had once required collectors to pay premiums for sought-after references, corrected steadily until pre-owned Panerai watches began trading at discounts that would have been unimaginable in 2003. The community fractured. Some remained loyal to the pre-Richemont references and the Bonatti-era watches, collecting the early pieces as preservation, maintaining the archive of what the brand had been before it decided to become something else. Some simply moved on, quietly, without ceremony, the way people leave things they have stopped believing in. And then the number arrived that confirmed what the forums had been documenting for years. Panerai's turnover fell 31%. The Richemont Specialist Watchmakers division posted a 13% overall decline in the financial year ending March 2025. Panerai's specific performance within that division, according to community research, was considerably steeper. The market had delivered its verdict in the language corporations understand, not forum posts, not collector disillusionment, not the image of a tattoo being covered. Revenue. Panerai was not always this. There was a version of this brand, a version that existed before the catalog bloated past recognition, before the closed casebacks, before the downgraded movements and the commodity calibers sold at manufacturer prices and the Stallone email that ended without a sign-off, that was genuinely extraordinary. The early watches were real. The military history was real. The community was real. These are not small things. Most luxury brands spend their entire existence trying to manufacture one of them. Panerai was handed all three. What they chose to do with that inheritance is what makes the downfall satisfying rather than simply sad. This was not a brand destroyed by market forces or changing tastes alone. It was a brand that looked at the people who loved it most, the ones with the logo on their skin, the ones who had built the community that made the brand legible to the world, and decided they were an asset to be extracted rather than a relationship to be honored. Somewhere, a man still has the crown guard tattooed on his arm. The brand that earned it is still trying to remember what it was supposed to be. Will Panerai make a comeback? What would you have done differently if you were left in charge? Let us know what you think in the comments. Support us by hitting like and subscribing.